It's wonderful to have you, and I applaud you all for being here. Oh, thank you. Oh, you know about these things. Thanks, Donnie. So the Slow Living Summit is the serious side of the 11th annual Strolling of the Heifer Parade and Festival. You can't, how about now? Okay. I'm really standing on a tiny little chair. I'm really this tall. Because last year, no one was able to see me. So a friend of mine said, you better get something. So it kind of feels nice to be tall. So it gives me great pleasure to welcome all of you, and especially to know that some of you have come as far as California, Kentucky, Seattle, North Carolina, Minnesota, and Australia? Wow! And I mean, I do know that somebody here is from Norway, and many other places, and congratulations to you and welcome to our beloved Brattleboro, Vermont. Strolling Over the Heifers has a primary mission of supporting family farmers by connecting people with the healthy food and local food that they eat. This is very important to all the farmers and the community, and we try to support that. So the Strolling of the Heifers has done an amazing job in doing all that. Over the last few years, we incorporated some of the concept of our Live Green Expo, and then we launched the Slow Living Summit. 3 years ago, I met Woody Tash, who you're going to meet very soon, who's the founder of Slow Money, and he contacted me, and he came to visit me, and he gave me his book, and I was hooked. And so when I first met Woody, I asked him, why are you interested in the Strolling of the Heifers? And he looked at me, I don't know where you are, Woody, if you remember this, he looked at me with an obvious look as if he was like I was supposed to know this. You know, we're all connected, and what you're doing is what we're all doing, and we all need to join forces. And he left me with a homework assignment to read, which was his book. And after reading Woody's book, Inquiries into Nature of Slow Money, and doing a bit of research, I called Woody and asked him to come and present a Slow Money conference as the serious side of the 2009 Strolling of the Heifers Parade and Festival, which kicked it off. And the main message at the conference that Woody and all the wonderful leaders that he brought with him was that we all have to take some sort of action in our own personal life and in our communities. Well, I took that seriously and created the Slow Living Summit. And I was hoping that it would bring all of you together in one tent, or as I like to say, a barn, and create solutions of how we can continue to make change. People continue to ask me, well, what do you mean by slow living? And what does it have to do with the Strolling of the Heifers? Well, here's the answer. I'm getting better at explaining it. The concept of slow living is to build, it's built on the metaphor of slow. Basically, that was taken from visionaries of organizations like Slow Food and Slow Money. And it builds on several layers of meaning that go beyond simple sustainable. Slow is the opposite of fast. Fast food, fast money, fast living, and all the negative consequences of fast for the environment and the health of people and societies. Slow embodies mindfulness, cooperation, sustainability, and resilience. Slow living is a more reflective approach of how we live, work, and play as human beings on a fragile earth. When we live slow, we become more strongly connected to the land and to our communities and to our neighbors. Slow living means building more sustainable communities, businesses, schools, nonprofits, and governmental entities. And of course, our heifer stroll. Well, it's a slow activity. The heifers don't run like the bulls in Paploma, and by the way, that inspired the strolling of the heifers. With our parade and festival, we capture people's imagination, and we teach them to be more mindful of their communities and connecting them with the food they eat. Slow living, as it turns out, is hard work. Being mindful of living a greener, more locally focused life takes some thought and deliberation. But once you start doing it, the rewards make it incredibly worthwhile. So we hope you'll slow down a little and enjoy Brattleboro this weekend. And I want you to please, please explore the town and its many amenities. Enjoy the 11th annual Strolling of the Heifers. Right after we finish with the Slow Living Summit, when we open these doors, you won't believe what Main Street is going to look like. It's a huge agricultural Mardi Gras block party outside. And please take time to connect with our many sustainably minded sponsors, vendors, and exhibitors. And I have to end by thanking our lead sponsors of the Slow Living Summit. Drew's Salad Dressing, you received many of their gifts and their bag. Chatham Imports, the wonderful drinks you just had, organic vodka and their Farmer Organic Gin. The many, many, many grants that we were able to provide were because the Sandy River Charitable Foundation, Green Mountain Coffee Roasters, Lydia B. Stokes Foundation were all very generous in providing us with that. And of course to our partners, Marlboro Graduate Center and World Learning. And the many, many sponsors, which you just saw their logos on the screen here, and of course in your program. We cannot do this without you, and we couldn't do this without our sponsors and all of you sitting here. And I just want to thank you all for all your support. Thank you very much. I get the great pleasure of introducing to you Ellen McCullough Lovell, who's the president of Marlboro College. When we first chatted with Ellen about our ideas of slow living, she understood our goal right away. I would like to share with you her words of wisdom that continue to resonate with me as I think about slow living philosophy. Ellen was so kind in opening her doors to Marlboro College, and when it was just an idea, she was the first one to come out and say, how can we help? What is it that you need? So in conversation, I remembered what she said. And she said, creating a just and sustainable world is not just about economics and energy. It's also about how we live and how we treat each other. We need to find solutions for a planet in which common good is just as important as private gain. Ellen has been a president of Marlboro College since 2004. She's a graduate of Bennington College. Ellen served as chief of staff to the Vermont Senator Patrick Leahy for 10 years. Under the Clinton administration, she worked as executive director of the President's Committee on the Arts and Humanity, deputy chief of staff to the First Lady, and deputy assistant to the president and advisor to the First Lady of the Millennium Project. And of course, on a local level, she's a champion in helping her community grow by serving on a number of organizations. It is my greatest pleasure to introduce to you Ellen McCullough Lovell.
Thank you. What a pleasure to be here. And it sounds to me as though the sound is all right. Good. I want to thank Orly Munsing and Ralph Mima for inviting me, and I'm especially glad to be here because Marlboro College is very invested in Brattleboro and in our region. Learning may be what ties us all together at this summit. And it strikes me that how we teach and learn at Marlboro College is the educational version of slow living. and I want to explain to you why. But first, I want you to understand my perspective. Marlborough College is a small institution of under 300 students with 40 faculty. We're also a graduate school with 150 adult learners in teaching, technology, and management. On the rural campus in Marlborough, created out of 2 old farms, we teach all the subjects that belong in the liberal arts. We also teach students how to think, how to write, how to find creative solutions, how to learn how to learn. Hundreds of them now work in Vermont, where they started businesses, bakeries, restaurants, cheese making, or are town planners, work in human services, or as artists. Our graduate school students come to improve their careers and learn in face-to-face residencies and through online dialogue with faculty and other learners. We're closely linked to Slow Living and the Strolling of the Heifer's missions through our own values, especially through our MBA in Managing for Sustainability. Responding to the needs of Vermont's large nonprofit sector, we award the Certificate in Nonprofit Management and a Master's in Mission-Driven Organizations with courses that overlap with the MBA. There are now 350 graduates of our nonprofit program working for organizations that are essential to Vermont's well-being. This is how one small college has an impact on the sustainability of one small state. From what I know about Summit participants, you all represent mission-driven organizations. And most of you would probably say right now that you are not-for-profit. With nonprofits comprising 18.7% of Vermont's economy, you'd think our political leaders would be debating daily how to sustain this sector. Just as we're asking how Vermont can create the best climate for sustainable enterprises, we should also be asking how to ensure we are the best home for cause-driven organizations. We nonprofit educators need to prepare the people who will carry out your ideas and produce what you invent. And we need you to support our promise of a rewarding future to our graduates. Why does Marlborough College and other small colleges persist in being small by design and insist on teaching the liberal arts? I, of course, don't mean liberal in the political sense, but in the classic meaning of education to free the mind and spirit and to release the individual's creativity. Why study Latin when you know you're going into a difficult job market? Why practice the arts when so many of our artists are underappreciated and underfunded? Why read Emily Dickinson or Robert Frost or study other great works of literature? Why bother to understand sociology or anthropology or economics? Why learn to think like a scientist? It takes time. It's slow. People sit together in classrooms or under the apple trees and think. Mind on mind. They learn to write their thoughts. They experiment, they fail, and as Samuel Beckett said, then they fail better. They learn to connect ideas that haven't been previously related. That, by the way, is one definition of creativity. One compelling reason we study the past, great literature and languages, or make music or theater, is to understand others' lives, to develop compassion for those who are different from us. Political philosopher Benjamin Barber says that only through the arts and the humanities do we become fit citizens to live in a democratic society. We study society to understand our responsibility in making a better, more inclusive one. And we need the liberal arts, as well as the professional skills we teach, to create the new ideas, the next solutions, the jobs of the future, the ones we can't train people for because we haven't imagined them yet. In America, we've always believed we can innovate our way out of any problem. We've always believed that we'll leave our communities and our world better for our children. Right now, we're not doing so well on those promises. And right now, we have reason to believe that at just the time when we most need to unleash our compassion and creativity, we are driving away those qualities. Creativity means allowing the widest and freest ranging of the human mind. But to complete this process, what is needed is control and direction. Discovery happens when we combine things that haven't been tried before. Arts education is one way that young people who are natural artists and scientists use materials, make discoveries, and acquire the discipline to express their ideas. But there's evidence that the No Child Left Behind law's emphasis on testing is driving the arts out of the classroom. Instructional time for the arts is decreasing as principals and teachers increase time to prepare for testing. This should worry us. The arts not only allow us to understand ourselves and other cultures, we know now they have a profound impact on cognitive skills, on staying in school, even on those all-important test scores. Whether it's the next great Vermont product or a better classroom, we are inventing our future. I want to make sure that the seeds for innovation are sprouting early in our children. We know that by 2018, 2/3 of the jobs that will emerge will require some college, if not a degree or more. And we know that 92% of Vermont children in middle school see themselves going to college. But somewhere along the way, they lose hope. Nearly 1/5 of high schoolers report they decided as early as 9th grade not to go on. Why aren't we engaging them? How can we change their aspirations and fulfill them? And I don't mean to leave out those who don't aspire to a college degree or think they can't afford one. We have a responsibility toward them too. And we are all asking these days how college can be more affordable. Like small farms, hospitals, or arts organizations, small colleges are highly labor intensive. We suffer, as economist Will Baumol said, from the cost disease. That means it's harder to counter increased costs with increased productivity. Colleges try to sustain their programs while states are cutting appropriations to higher education. And higher education is responding in 3 main ways: cutting costs, raising tuition, and asking for contributions. Our institutions are hard to sustain, more vulnerable to inflation, having higher percentages of healthcare costs, fuel oil, and utilities in our budgets. We run physical plants, but most of our costs are in personnel, faculty and staff, who have some of the best jobs in Vermont. I just presided over Marlboro's 65th commencement. Looking out over the shining faces of graduates, of course I encouraged them. I told them they will have from 6 to 8 jobs in their lifetimes. I quoted an alumna who said, "Marlboro grads don't just take jobs, they create jobs." I assured them their skills of clear writing, supple thinking, and creative problem solving will serve them well. Bill McKibben, their main speaker, told them to take what they had learned in our small, interdependent community and make it work in the rest of your lives. At the other end of the college experience, I talked to prospective students and their parents. They asked me directly, what good is a college degree? I can talk about the personal fulfillment of learning great literature or great art. I quote Thomas Jefferson declaring that an educated populace is the guarantor of their own liberty. But the answer that's most compelling to them comes from business leaders. Peter Hart Research asked employers, how should colleges prepare students to succeed in today's global economy? The top skills? The abilities to think clearly about complex problems, write and speak well, to work in teams with people different from yourself, be creative and innovative in problem solving, understand science and technology in real-world settings, understand the global context in which work is now done, apply knowledge and skills in new settings, and importantly, employers seek a strong sense of ethics and integrity. That sounds like a liberal arts education to me. A slow education, one that will teach us how to live together, how to invent the solutions to the problems we face. And if I leave you with just one message, it is that today young people need mentors. More than anything else, they need an adult to look up to who believes in them and gives them something to believe in. Encouraging them is so much of what it means today to be socially responsible. They need you. Thank you.
Hi again. Can you see me? It gives me great pleasure to introduce to you Laurie Hanow, the founder of Global Roundtable Leadership. And Laurie has agreed to join us this year. She was here last year to set the tone before each plenary session. And Laurie will be offering tone setting and helping us with stewarding the positive energy, thoughts, spirit, and collective wisdom throughout the summit. So as a group, we'll be able to consciously embody the mission of this summit. Last year, Laurie's role as the Slow Living Tone Steward was really grounding to the summit, and her ability, she has an amazing ability to help us all relax and find our inner calm space, which I know will allow us to reflect on where we are personally with the philosophy of slow living. So where is Laurie? It gives me great pleasure to introduce you to Laurie Hanow.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to us. I want to say what a privilege and a total joy it is to be the Slow Living Summit Steward. And we're just beginning. We've actually just started to cross the threshold of our collective beginning. And so I want to thank Orly and Ellen for bringing us across the threshold. And I want to speak for just a little bit to the potential and the potency and the quality of how we begin in these next few minutes and through this evening. So we heard about this gathering in a myriad of ways, and we decided to show up for a myriad of reasons, unconscious and conscious, logical and spiritual, rooted in our deep care and our passion. And so I want to offer that we collectively support how we cross this threshold. For many others have these impulses, but we are the ones who showed up. We are the ones who showed up. We are the ones who have showed up. And so I want us to just take a few seconds to breathe in that knowledge and that genius. Thank you. Yes. We have such potential to not only discuss and share and learn about slow living topics, but to practice embodying slow living, to become more congruent and build the muscles of congruency in what we value and how we be, how we show up, how we behave. And so I want to invite us to that end, to really be mindful about the quality of how we begin. And let's go to our breath. Let's take a couple of minutes to commit to coming present and to slowing down from the inside out. So I'm going to ask us just to sit with our spine straight, our legs uncrossed. Sit straight up. And let's breathe together. Just shaking off the travels to get here. Shaking off any story of the day that does not serve your presence here. And begin to drop down. So just breathe into your heart. Let your mind run. It'll do that. Bring your breath down into your core. Down to your feet in the earth. Cultivating your stillness. And let's take another minute together, still breathing, eyes opened or closed, cultivating our authenticity, to open, to cultivate openness. So breathe into your heart, feeling the openness of your heart. Allowing it to open even more. Breathe into your core. Relaxing the places you may be constricted. Breathe into your feet and into this beautiful earth. Thank you. And I invite us to continue to embody and to teach each other through our modeling what it means to live slowly. Turtle energy. Thank you so much. And now, Ralph Maima. Is Ralph here? Great. And we'll be hosting the panel. And I've had the great privilege of being a colleague to Ralph. I'm a faculty member, and Ralph is the director of the MBA program at Marlborough Graduate Center, Managing for Sustainability. He also is a family man with a wife and 3 children and lives here in Brattleboro and volunteers in many, many ways. But I also just want to mention, as I pass the mic over to Ralph, that he has such great qualities of heart and kindness and thoughtfulness, vulnerability and openness. And it has been a privilege to be his colleague and friend. Thank you, Ralph. See you all tomorrow.
Welcome to the Slow Living Summit, everybody. And thank you very much for that introduction, Lori Stewart. I'm just going to say a few things here and then call our panel up. And this is great. I tend to suffer from stage fright, but I can't see any of you. This is awesome. You're like just a black screen, you know. So I'd like to first just thank Orly and Ellen and Lori for all of your wonderful introductions. And I'm very pleased and honored to work with all 3 of you. And I want to also welcome everyone here, locals and visitors alike. Welcome to Brattleboro. Brattleboro is a natural place for this Slow Living Summit, this whole notion of slow living to emerge. We take slow so seriously that we never even built a commercial Route 5A around downtown. The federal government had to come and build an interstate and insert 3 exits, the most in Vermont of any town or city, but it still didn't speed things up. An interstate is no bypass. We're so slow around here that when it was time to upgrade our quirky dysfunction junction outside the main entrance here, rather than a roundabout, that's right, you're not in Massachusetts anymore, that's always confusing for the Rotarians in the audience, we put in the most complex system of traffic lights in New England, bar none. And there aren't just traffic lights, there are strobe lights. And we make sure that it takes a good long while to get through that intersection. Slow. And I was thinking about this too. You can actually form an S with your hands, like the universal symbol of slow. So Brattleboro is a natural location for the Slow Summit. It's just our speed. Seriously, though, in a moment we're going to be hearing from 3 honored guests of many honored guests here over these next few days who are going to lead us in setting an agenda for the next couple of days, starting the conversation around 3 themes, which they'll all approach in their own unique ways. Economics. What is working against the creation of a sane and humane and sustainable and resilient society, and how to get economics, businesses, entrepreneurs, managers, money, institutions working on behalf of these ideals. Another theme is communities, the central place that they deserve in all of our hearts and our logic and our action. A third theme is policies, the roles that governments and laws and political traditions and other kinds of habits of action and requirements of action work. Slow living is a complex knot of ideas and skills and enterprises and trends, but these are some solid starting points for what I am sure will emerge as a very rich and diverse and extremely stimulating conversation among all of us over the next few days, or a continuation of the conversation that we started here last year and even before. So in a moment I'm going to ask the panelists to come up to the stage. That's your cue to get ready. Each has about 15 minutes to just speak freely about what's on their mind, what moved them to come here, the work they do, followed by some general questions and conversation with the audience. And we'll run up until 8:30, which is the end of the plenary. I'll wrap up with a few practical comments at the end. Orly, did you want to also say anything at the end of this before we close? No? Okay. And I'm going to ask that each one of these gentlemen come up to the stage and join me here in the chairs. And they are Charles Eisenstein, author of Sacred Economics, speaker and thinker. Woody Tasch, founder of Investor Circle and Slow Money, author of the book Slow Money, venture capitalist or venture capital investor, entrepreneur, author. And John Ristakis, who is the author of Humanizing the Economy and executive director of the British Columbia Co-op Association in Vancouver. He's a linguist, he's a religious scholar, he's a denizen of UVic, the University of Victoria. And I invite you all to join me on the stage. You can sit wherever you'd like, and I thought that we would just follow the same order that's in the program of hearing from Charles, then Woody, and then John. And I'll give each one of you sort of like a 2-minute warning when we get out toward the 15-minute point. Thank you.
So you're going to get that portable mic.
Yeah, it's right there on the shelf. There you go.
All right. The light's on. Here we are. I don't usually get stage fright, and I like to actually be able to see my audience. Otherwise, like, who am I really talking to? You know, I like things to be personal and, you could say, local. So I'm going to try to invoke a slight undimming of the lights and see if it works. Let there be light. Okay. Well, it didn't quite work. Anyway, but I'll... So when I first, I have just kind of a vague impression of what slow living is all about. I'm a little bit familiar with the concept of slow money, and my impression, and Woody can correct me if I get it wrong, but that a large part of it is about slowing down the passage of money through our communities and through our local places. Today, typically the money comes in and then doesn't really circulate very much locally, but it just disappears to corporate headquarters or Wall Street somewhere. But I'm going to explore a different intersection between slowness and money. And it has to do with the frenetic nature of modern life, the rat race, our perception that life is speeding up and getting busier and busier, and that money has something to do with this, something to do with the rat race. As the saying goes, time is money. And you may have noticed that people in less monetized places where the money economy hasn't taken over so much and people still do things for each other informally in a kind of a gift economy, the third world, where life isn't so monetized, you might have noticed that the pace of life is a lot slower in those places. In Mexico, everybody does things mañana. In India, they have, India time. And there's just not this sense that time is limited. But here in a highly monetized economy, time is limited. And we feel like we're always busy. And that's kind of a paradox, because the monetized life, the life of a high degree of division of labor and a lot of technology, that is supposed to actually save us time. All of these technological devices were invented really as labor-saving devices. And the whole idea behind a division of labor is that it's more efficient for one person to specialize in something and do everything for you. So it's more efficient for the supermarket to prepare everybody's dinners and put them out in the deli, and then you take it home, than it is for every single person to make their own dinner. It's more efficient to have a child care center where everybody's children go than it is for every family to take care of their own children. And so this specialization is supposed to make everybody less busy. But it hasn't happened. We're way more busy than hunter-gatherers were, who worked 20 hours a week. We're more busy than medieval peasants, high medieval peasants who had 150 saints' days off every year. We're more busy than Ladakhi villagers that Helena Norberg Hodge describes, who had a growing season of 4 months and spent the rest of the year in festivals, week-long weddings, and things like that. Like, what happened? Why is it? And this has been a question for hundreds of years. Back in the 1790s, futurists were saying, a machine can do the work of 1,000 men. Therefore, very soon, each of us will have to work only 1,000th as hard. It was a no-brainer. And this has gone on and on and on. In the 1980s, Alvin Toffler was saying pretty much the same thing. He was the most prominent futurist of the time, and he said, the greatest problem facing society by the year 2000 will be what to do with all our leisure time. And he predicted an age of leisure almost as good as that enjoyed by the high medieval peasants. And so this is a question that we face in economics. And the basic question is, why? At every juncture, well, this is more of the answer. Why is this happening? It's because at every juncture, when we've had a choice of either work less or consume more, we've always chosen to consume more. A machine can do the work of 1,000 men, therefore everybody consumes as much as 1,000 people did before. So why is that? I'm going to give you a couple of reasons why. One is a systemic reason. It has to do with the money system. And it's very basic to the money system. It has to do with the way that money is created and the way money circulates in our system as interest-bearing debt. So when, I'm not going to go into too many details here, but whether it's at the level of the Federal Reserve creating base money by purchasing securities on the open market, or a bank creating the kind of money that we use by making loans. A bank makes a loan and creates that money and also creates a corresponding amount of debt, creates more debt than there is money. And all money is created like that, which puts everybody in competition for never enough money. And that's kind of a simplified version, but it's an accurate simplification and you may have experienced this in your own engagement with the economic system, this feeling that there's never enough money, never enough time, never enough of anything, perpetual insecurity. And that's built into the money system. Secondly, the only way that the money system can even keep going is for when all of those debts come due, for there to have been even more money created with even more debt. And when those debts come due, even more money has to be created. And so the system only works if there's endless growth. And what is growth? Growth means more and more stuff that we pay for, more and more of nature being converted into product, and more of human relationships being converted into services that we pay for. So this speeding up of the world has a basis in our money system. And we can sense that, well, it's becoming obvious that the days of this system are numbered. Because like I said, it only works if the economy keeps growing. And it's becoming quite clear that we're running out of room for growth. Now, another reason for the increasing busyness of modern life is a psychological reason. That the more we live a monetized life, the more we are impoverished in another way. we have more and more things that can be quantified, but it comes at the expense of the things that can't be quantified. So, for example, yeah, it is more efficient for a dedicated supermarket kitchen to make everybody's meals. But then something is lost, that intimate relationship with the person who cooks your food. It's more efficient to perhaps, if you discount perverse subsidies on fuel and things like that, maybe it's more efficient to grow food on factory farms somewhere and have it shipped into Vermont. Certainly it's more efficient per unit of labor. But then something is lost, that individual interaction, that personal connection, the connection with place, the rich web of relationships that connect people to place, all of that is gone. And that is something that we're hungry for. That's something that leaves us impoverished, and that's something that we want to recover. But if it's not available, then we'll make do with a substitute, consuming more and more and more of what we don't really even need. And that just keeps, I'm flabbergasted by it. You know, when I look around, I drive around, and there's these enormous McMansions, you know, 5,000 square feet, 8,000 square feet on these huge lawns, completely unused almost. No one even goes into the living rooms because they're too big. All the plastic junk, you know, all of these sprawling suburbs, armaments. I mean, so much of our productivity doesn't even serve any human need. It doesn't serve our well-being. And I think that a lot of this consumption is kind of addictive. That, you know, anything that seems to meet a need but doesn't really meet that need, it just makes you feel better for a little while, but it doesn't meet the essential hunger, then no amount of it will be enough. And so we find that no amount of money is enough, no amount of stuff is enough. And that's kind of the personal dimension of the same collective phenomenon, where no amount of economic growth will ever be enough. It has to go on forever. And so the pressure from the financial system steers government policy in that direction. And you hear all the politicians, whether they're left or right, they have the same prescription, really, when it comes down to it, which is, let's reignite economic growth. Let's get the economy growing again. Let's convert even more of our relationships, the things that can't be quantified, into something that can be quantified. So I'd like to now just say a little bit, you know, like I said, this system is in crisis. And this crisis is, I would like to call it a birth crisis. The old world isn't working anymore. And we're entering kind of this place in between worlds, where the old ways aren't working and we don't know what the new ways are, although a lot of people in this room are pioneering some of these new ways. But as a matter of mass consciousness, people are feeling pretty lost and clinging all the more tightly to the old world. And that's normal. It's part of a birth process. But for me, it's a cause for optimism. This is how transition happens. In personal life, this is the way it happens too. Like the way you were doing things isn't working anymore, and then eventually, finally, you let go, and you're open to doing things in a different way. And I think this is happening on a collective level today. But that's not the only way that change happens. It's not the only impetus that's necessary. I don't think that we're going to be rescued by the crisis. I think that an equally important part is our desire to recover those things that have been lost. Everywhere I go, I ask people, what's missing from your lives, you know? And people always say it's community, connection. And I think that that's why we're gathered here today. It's really, you know, for all the talk about sustainability, this isn't a fear-based movement. We're not saying, well, we better change our ways, otherwise the world is going to end. I mean, that's certainly part of it, but also we have a sense that a more beautiful world is possible, and we strive toward it. And I think that, well, to link it back, so here I've circled back to the local again, to the personal, to the connected. These are things that are not really efficient. They're things that happen when the space and the time is available for them to emerge. And so here we are today to begin to develop these things and to learn from each other ways to bring, to rebuild connectedness and relationship to people, to place, to the land, to all beings on earth. That we're here to develop ways to do that and to help each other do that and to inspire each other, and maybe most importantly, to remind each other that we're not crazy for doing this, to remind each other that, you know, the old logic is falling apart anyway. And whereas maybe 10 or 20 years ago, these kinds of efforts seemed a bit crazy, the demise of the old system wasn't so obvious, and they seemed kind of quixotic maybe. Today, we're understanding that there's a new logic emerging that is based on our felt experience of oneness, of interconnection, of non-separation. And so we're here in part to remind each other of the truth of that. Like for me, you know, when I see other people living according to that logic of connection, then it makes sense for me to do it too. It helps me to do it too. I think that anything that we do to rebuild connections and to bestow on our fellows the sense that we're not separate beings is not only an act of friendship and love, but it's also a political act. It reduces the craving. The experience of connection reduces the craving for connection, reduces the feeling of being alone in the universe that motivates all kinds of horrible politics and consumption. So I'm really happy to be part of this and to learn from you all in these days here. And with that, I'll turn it over to the next panelist. Thank you.
Well, can't we just have a conversation after that? You covered so many important topics so beautifully. So anybody who hasn't read Charles's book, Sacred Economics, hopefully you're going to rush out and get it now. I'm thinking, because you covered so many great topics, I'm just going to share. You've mentioned that the logic of the current system is we can see it collapsing all the time around us, so I actually have a few examples from today's paper. And really, if you just pay attention slightly, and you come from a certain bias, the signs are everywhere. So here's today's paper, the Boston Globe. I'm just going to read you this little blurb from the front page left, summary. It says, biotech, oh, and by the way, this is all under the heading of the week after Facebook went public, right? So there's a lot of things we could all talk about the crazy opposite of slow anything, all right? Or the opposite of real connection. I have a slide tomorrow that I stuck in my slideshow. The Atlantic just had an article not too long ago called "Is Facebook Making Us Lonely?" And people might remember from maybe a year or so ago, they had another article, "Is Google Making Us Stupid?" These are real articles, very insightful. And when the Google one came out, the first thing I did was I called my son, who at that time was about 26, who grew up, stuck to. Did anybody see Michelle Obama on Jon Stewart last night? I can't. The reason I'm saying that, she gave the statistic, our kids are spending an average of 7.5 hours a day in front of screens. 7.5 hours a day, average. So my son, being of that ilk, I immediately called him when I heard about the article, Is Google Making Us Stupid? I said, Xander, what do you think? Is Google making us stupid? And I didn't know what he would say. Without batting an eye, I said, absolutely. This is someone who grew up on it and is, Anyhow, so the signs are all around us of the crazy, fast, disconnected thing, or superficially connected but profoundly disconnected. So here's the thing from today's Boston Globe. It says, biotech says it overstated clinical data. Vertex Pharmaceuticals, Inc. of Cambridge revised the findings on a cystic fibrosis treatment 3 weeks after the initial report sent the company's stock soaring. 5 executives and 2 directors sold shares worth millions in the interim. This is not... Correct, right. They just, it was like Karnak. You remember the Johnny Carson thing? Okay. All right. Same paper, same front page. Curt Schilling is going through, and those of you from the Boston area, maybe this, I don't know if the story made it to Brattleboro or not. Hopefully not, for your sake. But Curt Schilling, the Red Sox ace of former years, has invested virtually, according to him, virtually his whole net worth, $50 million, in a video game company, which was enticed to Rhode Island with all kinds of $75 million worth of loan guarantees, and now the loan guarantees are due because the company is not meeting, is having financial difficulty. So there's a huge hue and cry going on about political deals and all the rest of it. And the thing that caught my mind, as crazy as all of that is that it's a video game company. I think it might be a sports video game company. Does anybody know that? Yes, I'm seeing. No, I think it's sports. That's why Curt Schilling, he thought they could make a hit video game. So they're investing these many, many tens of millions of dollars trying to create a video game that they have not yet brought to market. And what's the project code name? They don't release the actual name. The code name is Copernicus. And when I read that, I just thought, my God, are we kidding? One of the greatest minds in the history of our species, let's say, who figured out that the Earth is actually going around the sun and not vice versa. And that's what they named this video game after. All right, that's a little, I'm not trying to connect these thoughts too much. Except, here's a connection, here's a little tiny connection. This week's Economist. So this is like, again, you don't have to make this stuff up, you just have to root around a tad. So there's a big section in this week's Economist about the Chinese economy. And anyone who's been following the Chinese economy, which is depressing to do, and I do it as a professional, I'm just a kind of a rank amateur who occasionally notices things. And so here's this week's thing, it's a big section, like 10 or 12 pages, and I'm just 2 things, these are again, not to make them overly connected, just 2 random things. First one is an article that's entitled Prudence Without a Purpose. And what's the article about? It's about 2 ghost cities in China, 2 cities that were built, like they built it and no one came. I'm not making this up. It starts out, it says Genghis Khan Square in Kangbashi is as big as Tiananmen Square, but unlike Tiananmen Square, it has only 1 woman to sweep it. It takes her 6 hours, meaning there's nobody there. There's nothing to sweep up. There are no people, no trash. That's one of the benefits of having no people, I guess. All right. Okay, GDP is easily misunderstood. It is not a measure of wealth or well-being. Rather, it measures the pace of economic activity. So I'm going to talk a lot more about that tomorrow when I really get into the slow money thing. So, so that's just today's symptoms of the logic of a crazy, crumbling industrial logic that's no longer sustainable. And I'm not going to say too much more because I'm going to talk a lot tomorrow. But that wasn't a joke, Will. But I'm going to read some remarks from one of the owners of Full Belly Farm, which is one of the older CSAs in San Francisco, and it's about community and economics and relationships and connection and a whole bunch of things. So I thought it would be an interesting thing to read. But before I do, I know Judy Wicks is out there somewhere, and I actually think, despite the fact that we can't really see anything, I think I see a white head of hair, like right there. It's her. That's pretty good. Her hair is very white, for those of you who don't know Judy. And Judy, among her many other amazing accomplishments, was the co-founder of BALI, the Business Alliance for Local Living Economies. And I'm calling her out because, and I don't even know if you remember this, this thing, you probably don't, but it meant a lot to me at the time. This is about, I don't know, 12 years ago or so, and I might be off a couple of years, but we were, a bunch of us were meeting at the Social Venture Network in Mohonk Mountain House, and we were meeting about this idea that Judy and Laurie Hamill, her co-founder, had starting an organization called the Business Alliance for Local Living Economies, which hadn't been I don't think it had even been launched yet, but you would correct me if you were up here. But it was either hadn't been launched or it was very early in the launch. And on the way there, I read in that day's Wall Street Journal, this is what made me think of it, it was that day's symptom of the craziness. There was an article in the Wall Street Journal that day about what a great time it was to invest in big pharma, in big pharmaceutical companies. And why was it a great time to invest in big pharma companies? This is tied oddly together with the China article. The reason is that there was about to be an outbreak, tremendous growth in, I think it was diabetes, asthma, and heart disease in China. And it had all the pharmaceutical company projections of the growth in China for their drugs because of the increase in these diseases. But that's not all. It actually went further. The article went further. And I remember reading it and thinking, how could they in good faith even print this stuff? Did anybody actually think about it when they were putting it? It said, why are these diseases increasing in China? And without any discernible irony of any kind, the reporter just went down and said, because we are exporting to them cars, cigarettes, and fast food. Meaning we're sending them the things that are making them sick, we're making money off them, and then we're making money off of selling them the drugs to supposedly cure them. And when I read that, I thought to myself, well, I'm going to talk about what a local living economy might be, and I'm sure we're going to have trouble defining it because it's a new idea. And everyone's going to say, what is it, and what does local mean, and what does living mean? I held it up at the meeting. That's why I don't remember, Jude. I don't think I've ever talked to you about this. I don't know if you remember me doing this, but I held up the Wall Street Journal. I said, I don't know if we're going to be able to figure out what a local living economy is, but we know what a global dying one is. And it's that. So to me, heading in the new direction, and Charles did a great job of sketching out a lot of the values of that paradigm of what the new direction would be. We don't have to know what the destination is. We don't have to be able to define it perfectly. We just have to believe in the destination. We have to believe that moving towards slower. And it's not all or nothing. It's not about being completely anti-growth or completely anti-consumerism. It's about consumerism run amok and growth run amok with no countervailing forces and no balance at all. And I would believe that whether we were on the precipice or not, but I agree we are probably over the precipice. So, okay, that's enough of that stuff. I'm just going to read you the words of Paul Muller, one of the owners of Full Belly Farm in California. For those of you who are in the food business or food production or processing or distribution, it's about a 1,500-member CSA. So it's a decent scale CSA, one certainly in the top 10%, let's say, in the country, probably top 5% in terms of size. It's been around for about 30 years. And I would say that Paul's words very eloquently carry forward some of the ideas that Charles was talking about in terms of connection, relationship, an alternative to kind of crazy buy low, sell high, growth economics. Okay, here's Paul's words. Microbial life in the soil is our bank. If we extract life faster than we reinvest, the soil becomes finite. Our customers are also our bank. They are our storehouse of financial capital. What is really important about CSAs is that these relationships allow us to leave behind the export model, which for years was all there was in farming. You grew your food, but you went to the market to buy your groceries. In fact, one of our neighbors has been raising cattle for 50 years, and until last year, he had never eaten any of his own beef. In the old export model, you never knew the buyer. You didn't realize the full value of your produce, so you couldn't reinvest. With the CSA model, we are in a position to reinvest, to keep money moving locally. And this has a revitalizing effect on rural communities. That's a horrible Freudian slip. on rural communities that desperately need it. More than that, the CSA creates direct feedback loops between consumers and the growing of their food. And I'm really reading this because of the last sentence, which is this: the value of these information-rich relationships is hard to overstate. And I think you spoke very eloquently to the lack of relationships, the lack of connection. And I just love that phrase, the value of these information-rich relationships is hard to overstate. And before I pass the microphone, I'll just end with a question, which is kind of a framing question, and I know it's already kind of in everyone's head, and it goes something like this. How can we really learn to live slowly or enjoy living slowly if our money is zooming around the planet, invested in things that we don't fully understand and we don't fully believe in? And that's it. That's a question.
It's always a bad idea to follow two people like this on a panel. I'm just going to actually pick up on a point that you were touching on towards the end of your comments as a segue into some of the thoughts I want to share with you this evening. And it has to do with the question of connectivity and the connections between people. I live in Vancouver. And actually recently I was speaking with a friend of mine. Actually, I moved to Vancouver about 15 years ago. I grew up in Toronto. And we were talking about the difference between Toronto and Vancouver. And I was reflecting on this. And it was kind of hard to put my finger on it exactly. There's something really quite distinct about the city of Vancouver. I don't know if many of you have been there. But it came to me somehow that of all the places I've ever been in, if any city is a Facebook city, it's Vancouver. It's a city that is sort of at the forefront of so many things and at such a high personal and social cost for the kinds of things that Vancouver is becoming known for. But it just raises the point of what is important to people. And recently, the Vancouver Foundation, which is the largest community foundation in Canada, had undertaken a major research survey. And they interviewed over 100 leaders in the Vancouver area. These are people that worked in business, people that worked in nonprofit associations, people that worked in charities and volunteer groups and so on. And the foundation was reflecting on what its mission should be. They've been around a long time, they've done a lot of good work, but where is it heading? Where should it be putting its purpose and its money? And so they did these series of interviews, over 100 people. And what they thought they were going to get was, well, the Vancouver Foundation should really be focusing on child poverty or on environment, fixing our environment, or dealing with global warming, or dealing with, the kinds of, the kinds of issues that we read about and think about and deal with all the time. And for many of us that are involved in this kind of work. And it shocked them, it surprised them when the answer came back from people that are the heads of, these nonprofit organizations, a very large, very successful group, some of them. And what they were saying was, what's most important to me as a professional in the work that I do is I feel a sense of disconnection, a sense of alienation from my community. And this sense of alienation and disconnection was repeated. One person after another person after another person, and it completely shocked and sort of befuddled the organization because they had not expected that. They had expected a focus in terms of what their issue should be, what their priority should be in terms of these other sort of economic and social issues. So it is a theme that has sort of emerged, over the course of these last couple of presentations. But I'm beginning with that because it's something that I too have been thinking increasingly about. I work as the executive director for the BC Cooperative Association, and I work on a daily basis with cooperatives and the co-op movement internationally, nationally, and locally all the time. But as I've sort of moved into this work, I've come to a point where I've begun to interpret what cooperatives do and what cooperation is about, very much in personal terms. So I've moved from a consideration of the co-op model as being a kind of a response to an out-of-control corporate paradigm that we're having to contend with, and moving into a sense of, well, what does the model bring to the challenge of repairing community, for example, the crisis in community that is unfolding around us. And what does it mean in terms of how people relate to each other, how people perceive each other in community, and how people care for each other. I've spent a good deal of time thinking about and researching on social care and systems that we create to provide social services and caring services to people that are in need of care. And the fundamental role of reciprocity, of mutuality, of relationships between caregivers and care recipients at the very center of what it means to have a caring relationship, which is not possible unless you have a reciprocal, respectful, mutual exchange that goes on between the person that offers and the person that receives. And this reciprocity is at the foundation, at the heart, and at the base of nonprofit organizations, social service organizations, all of these social economy organizations that many of you, work in, and certainly at the heart of the cooperative model itself. So I took a whole bunch of notes down thinking, well, what am I going to talk about here tonight? And I wanted first to comment on the basic and fundamental role that people working together in mutual cooperative relationships, how that has played a key part of the rise of the slow movement. The slow food movement in Italy, particularly in northern Italy, was very much an outgrowth of a highly cooperative culture and a high cooperative economy. And the food co-ops and the consumer co-ops and so on were very active in supporting the emergence of the slow food movement. And I noticed just tonight, looking at the screen, all the organizations and all the co-ops that are sponsoring this conference. To me, it's gratifying, but it's also a natural, I think, extension of what cooperatives have done from the very beginning, from the 1840s when they started in the UK, which is to marry and to connect economics with social values. And as I was thinking about why are we in this? Why has life become so hectic? Why are we running faster and faster just to stay put and to keep our heads above water? Why is the system so conducive to the kind of out-of-control pace that all of us seem to be caught up in? And to me, it kind of boils down to a disconnection between economics on the one hand and social values on the other. And when I interpret, well, what do we do about this? How do we respond to this? I think of two things. I think first, we have to find models, find means to reconnect and relate social goals with economic practice. If we do not do that, the broken system that we're in will not be healed, it will not be fixed. And the second aspect of that is not just connecting social values to economic models, but getting control of our economy, locally, in community, regionally, nationally, internationally, unless we find the models and the means to democratize our economies, all the large questions that we're dealing with, questions of sustainability, questions of environmental degradation, questions of global warming, questions that are arising in the context of a slow living summit, slowing down to a human scale and a human pace that makes sense to us, to our families, to our personal well-being, to our connections to community. None of this becomes possible unless and until we find a way of democratizing our economies. And we need models to do that. I mean, this is one reason I'm interested in cooperatives and what they provide to the problem we're describing here. But the other problem is the kinds of attitudes and mental sort of predispositions that people have internalized now. So many of us become competitors as opposed to cooperators. Consumers, not so much citizens. Individuals and individualistic as opposed to social beings. That's the kind of ideology that pervades what we see, what we read, what we hear, and ultimately how we internalize these messages and behave in the way that we do. So, at the end of the day, perhaps the greatest value in a gathering like this is breaking apart the ideology and the belief systems that are a consequence, a product out of this out-of-control corporate capitalist paradigm that we're all swimming around in, trying to keep our heads above. So I'll just end on the point that probably the hardest thing and the most challenging thing that I've encountered in my work is conveying a sense of there are real, concrete alternatives out there. Many of you in this room are aware of them, and many of you are creating them and working in them. But for a lot of people, the sense of an exit off this highway isn't present. And so the final triumph of ideology is when people can no longer imagine an alternative. You know, with the demise and decline of the communist model in 1989 and after the fall of the Soviet East Bloc countries and so on, socialism and communism has fallen off the map, so to speak, in terms of ways of thinking differently about economics and how we plan and organize our societies. And we're left with what we have. Clearly broken, clearly out of control, clearly antisocial, clearly toxic to our personal well-being and the well-being of our families and our communities. But what do we replace it with? What do we say, here's something else that we can look at? Both a philosophy and a practice and a mechanism to repair this damage. And I think that is the task that I'm involved in. And I think many of you also are involved in. And hopefully by the end of this event and other events like it, we'll start crafting some concrete visions about what that looks like and what it takes to build it, to continue it, to expand it, and to make it, in a sense, known to people. Because I believe something in it, and the people I work with believe something in it, but too many people simply are not connected to this and have no knowledge, no exposure to it. So whatever we do here, I hope we also find ways of communicating and making what we're talking about visible and present and possible for people that are not in this room. Thank you.
Thank you, all three of you, for a lot to think about. We have some time for a conversation that includes everyone in this room, but I thought that I would kind of set the stage by putting a question about questions out to each one of you three. And my question is, what questions do you like to hear people asking? This goes a little bit to some of the things that Woody was referring to in was it Wall Street Journal or New York Times and Economist articles that you were referring to. But when you read the popular media, when you hear things on the radio or see them on TV or hear people talking in a public space, you know, and at the same time you go around as you do with your mind filled with your work and your questions and the visions and ideals and so forth that you're continually grappling with. What questions lift your heart or really stop you in your tracks when you hear other people asking them?
For me, it's questions that say, hey, here's something, and I know it's related to what you've been talking about, or I know it's related to what we've been talking about, and I don't know how, but I know that there's a connection, and what is that?
Well, I always enjoy questions that, in a sense, are critical of the models and the ideas I'm putting across. The best questions for me are the ones that say, well, okay, well, you're talking about this, about co-ops and cooperations and so on, but, you know, I've come across organizations that, you know, you're describing, you know, they're crappy. You know, they're not really, you know, putting it out the way they should be, and there's real problems with, you know, what do you do about that? You know, so questions that, in a sense, upset the paradigm are questions I really appreciate. And not just the paradigm I've been criticizing, but the paradigm I'm actually promoting.
All right, I admit it. The best question I've heard recently is, do you think it's time to buy Facebook stock? No, I just made that up. So, because I had a little more time to think about it, I thought of questions first, and then I thought of a story. So I'm going to do the story, because I think it's better than the questions I came up with. But it has to do with speaking. You're asking, when we're interacting with people or talking, what comes back that's inspiring or heartwarming. So I was speaking about a year ago at the Minnesota Sustainable Farmers Association. And it was a group probably about the size of this audience tonight, and we were way into the discussion. Like I'd given a talk, and then we were having the full group. We were like 2 hours into a discussion of slow money and a fair amount of detail, and it was almost all farmers in the room. And one of them raises his hand, and he says, I've been listening with interest, and it's intriguing, but I'm starting to realize how hard this is going to be. I mean, you're talking about having some of my neighbors be maybe part owners or lending me money to the farm, and I don't even like some of my neighbors. So everybody laughed. And I started answering him, and I said, yes, you're right. This is going to be hard. At the beginning, we don't have any models for really doing this. And then I talked a little bit. I was in a conversation with him in public, so it wasn't so much a question, or it was a kind of a question, but we were in a conversation. And I said, relationships are harder than transactions. Transactions are hard enough. Relationships are even harder. I didn't say the word reciprocal, but the thought was there. And then I had a learning moment, and I just kind of came to it. I said, well, wait a minute. How many people in this room are farming because it's easy? And there must not be a lot of farmers in the room tonight, because a really hard laugh came out of everybody. And I said, well, who told you that investing was supposed to be easy? I said, we have the world of easy investing, meaning we give our money to people we don't know very well for them to invest in things they don't understand very well halfway around the world in places none of us will ever visit. That's the world of easy investing. You don't really have to do anything. You just give your money to somebody else. And then we get the world. As a result, we're reaping the rewards of that kind of investing. So that's not really a question, but the interaction really did inspire me and warm my heart.
Well, before I open this up and turn it into a larger conversation, I'd just like to say that the kinds of questions that I always love to hear, especially from kids, especially as they become older, become teenagers, and are asking bigger and bigger and more incisive questions about the world around us, is when people ask questions about presidents and CEOs and chairmen of various organizations, people who it's easy to abstract away into almost this impersonal clockwork of the universe. You know, these things just happen. Mergers happen. Stock market crashes happen. Elections happen. And what I really like is when suddenly the impersonality and the sort of, you know, the motion of the spheres, the clockwork automatic nature of the rest of humanity disappears, and people go, what was that person thinking? In other words, the institutionality and the impersonality is stripped away, and a person is looked at as a moral actor, as a human being, as somebody who has their fears, their concerns, their foibles, but they're a person. They're not just part of some sort of automatic process that's beyond human control, beyond human knowing. And I was thinking about some questions I heard recently from some students, you know, where they look at these major actors on the world stage, major players in our economy and in our political world, and they say, you know, what was John Corzine thinking? Or what was Mark Zuckerberg thinking? Or why was he pursuing that as he did? Or you know, what was, and good things and bad things. But I like to see people seeing each other, no matter how powerful or remote, seeing all of us as people, as moral actors, as part of a wider community. I don't think that there's a microphone out there wandering around the floor, and I'm a little reluctant to give this one up. But I think we have pretty good acoustics here, and I'm thinking if I can get out of the light field and see everybody. There is one here, and I can possibly switch it on. Let's see. Yeah, maybe. Sure, I can do that. Yeah, okay. Bill is going to...
So I'll run it around fast. Just keep your questions quick.
Awesome. Thank you, Bill.
Thank you very much. One of the things that's really perplexing me is a lot of the young interns that come to work on my farm don't want to go to college. And I really thought maybe you could give me some insight on that. What do I do with that? It happens all the time. Thank you.
I'd love to answer that one. Talk about that one.
This doesn't stretch far enough.
Let me work on it while you're talking.
Why don't you dive in?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of independently minded people reject college and everything that it stands for, which is, you know, it's kind of an entrance ritual into, I mean, you know, of course, the liberal arts education is a great thing, but that's kind of an endangered species now. And college is kind of an extension of school, you know, where you learn to be a standardized consumer and a standardized producer and occupy standardized roles and do as you're told. And it's quite like a prison, actually. And right, and you end up in debt, you know, that forces you to occupy a role that you don't even want to be in, and you still can't get a job. So a lot of smart young people are foregoing college. That's my not so humble opinion about it.
Yeah, ditto.
I think some of the money managers in the room will know this, but what is it? Is college debt now bigger than all the homeowners debt? No, it can't be. That can't be true. That can't be true.
Credit card.
Bigger than credit card debt, right. It's more than $1 trillion or something, some number like that. More than $1 trillion. So I think his name is Peter Thiel. Someone correct me if I have it wrong. I think it's Peter Thiel. He's one of the founders of eBay. Oh.
Nice.
Wait, what was that? What was that applause for? Oh, the lights. I couldn't be for Peter Thiel. I'm going, what the hell is everybody? All right. That's good, because otherwise I'm not going to say what I'm about to say. Well, I didn't know who he was until recently. I think some people in the audience probably did. But he's just gotten a little media lately because he's been offering these $100,000 prizes for people to drop out of college and try to start a business. And his whole thing is it's much better for you to start a business than to finish your education. He's extremely libertarian, very controversial. He's also he has these ideas for building like small cities on platforms in the ocean. That will not be subject to U.S. federal law, I think is the reason he's doing it, for tax purposes and other crazy things. It's pretty crazy. I just offer that as a random thought brushstroke on your question. Having recently paid for 2 kids to go to college, and I don't think I felt any different when I was there. I was on the other end of it. My parents paid. I had no debt. I got to go to, and we did the same thing for our kids. We were like barely able to do that. But I never felt good about, it just seems preposterous. The cost, this is not even a cost-benefit thing. I don't even think like that, but just the cost of it just seems so completely outrageous compared to the actual value that is delivered that it was really hard for me to go through, but we did it. We just kind of mindlessly went along with the exercise. It's not an answer to your question. But I'm kind of curious back to you. Why does this worry you so much?
I have 2 children in college, and I do believe that we are at the paradigm, a new paradigm, and we're coming into this new transition. But has it already started? Do we still need to get a few more generations through college? I don't know. I just raised the question. I think young people should be pondering and studying and reading. So I'm an advocate for college, but I think they should be farming. So maybe we should be combining it. I just wanted to hear your insight.
Hi, I'm Donnie from Australia, that's right. Yeah. So I have a question that's going to sound a little trivial, but in fact I think for me it gets to the heart of slowness. I really appreciated from each of the speakers the focus on relationships. And in fact I feel like this is some form of relationship here, right? Speakers on a panel and then an audience. Yet what relationship would actually begin what healthy relationship would actually begin by starting with the negatives, focusing on the problems? And is there not more synonymity with a slow approach and an asset-based approach? In other words, what if we started every presentation here at this conference with what's working, the appreciative inquiry approach? And look, I have to put this out there. This is something, that problem-solution pathology, in my perspective, that's been very masculine-driven. Not necessarily always by men, but synonymous with masculinity. And so therefore my question really is, what potential could be unleashed if we began every presentation in a slow, stepping back approach, looking at the beauty that's already there? How would that possibly change our psychology in engaging with these issues?
So I don't know if this is an absolutely direct answer, but it's a partial answer. When you were asking that, I was thinking of how beautiful slow food is, and how slow food inspired me to think about, well, what if I took those values and put it into money? What would we do? And that started a lot of the thought process. So I'm just going to say a few things about how beautiful slow food is. I'm not going to go into it in detail. Just say that I think part of the power of it is. You could have said, why don't we all get around? Well, we did kind of eat together, but we didn't. If Carlo Petrini was here, he would have had the founder of Slow Food, I mean, here's a story. Is Kathy Berry in the audience somewhere? Hey, Kathy. So Kathy was on the board of Investor Circle for many years when I was chairman, and now she's on the board of Slow Money. And she's a new resident of Brattleboro. And she'll remember we had Carlo Petrini come to Investor Circle, which is an angel group, meaning a group of high net worth people, a couple hundred people from all over the country, and we had him speak. And then that night, we didn't have a sit-down dinner. We had what we call heavy hors d'oeuvres. It was in a fairly nice hotel, and they were all relatively local and organic food, but it was brought to us. He said, "You call this civilized? We're not sitting down and eating together." So you didn't talk about breaking bread together and just the basic beauty of that, which is obviously very difficult to do in a group this size. But the beauty of slow food is, the power of it is that it's affirmative. And even though there are people in the slow food movement who speak against GMOs or speak against this company or that company, the basic impulse is completely positive. It's about affirming, kind of taking what Paul Muller said there about these what do you call it, information-rich relationships was his phrase. But it's about affirming relationships between consumers and producers, reestablishing them, celebrating them, and then actually celebrating them in the act of eating really healthy, delicious, biodiverse, artisanally produced, you can put all these words on it, but real food produced by real people sharing it together is a profoundly positive and beautiful thing. That's one of the reasons I think food is a place to start rebuilding the economy, because it is essentially an act of communion, if you want to call it that.
I take your point, and I want to go back to Facebook for a moment for some reason. I've got, I'm pretty present on that, and I've got, a whole bunch of, connections on it, so on. And one of the things that really strikes me is the tenor, the character of the communication that I'm in the middle of in my network of friends on Facebook. And most of these folks are sort of people like me, I guess. They're involved in social justice work and social change work, and and so on. But there is such a tone of kind of complaint, right? Negativity, a kind of a whiny quality about the communications. And I think, what, how is that, and why is that? And it's a kind of a cycle of kind of mutually reinforcing kind of ways of addressing the dilemma, that we're in. And I see it all the time. And you put your finger on it, and it is it kind of replays the problems over and over again. And even the solutions are always reactions, to something that's broken that needs to be fixed. Not enough on, here are the positive things that we start from and build from there. So I just acknowledge what you're saying. But I also feel that that kind of frame of mind that kind of responds in that kind of complaint-like way is a symptom of something. And it's actually a symptom of a lot of things, but one of the things I think it's a symptom of is a sense of powerlessness. A sense that, complaining or being negative or being critical does give to you a sense of, having a voice and being able to aim the arrow, so to speak, and let it go to the target, that's in your mind. And that is a response, I think, that's a normal kind of a response for people that care about things, that are passionate about their values, but are also feeling pretty powerless about how to affect change. So it's not a trivial thing. It's a deep thing. And I just think it's kind of, in the mix in terms of how is it that when we talk like that. Or when we try and problem solve, we problem solve like that. It's because we're on the receiving end. We are on the margins, or at least we feel we're on the margins of, the problems and the dilemmas that we're sort of grappling with. So I'm not surprised that that happens, is what I'm saying.
One of my favorite sayings is by Audre Lorde. She said, "The master's tools will never dismantle the master's house." And I feel like I stand convicted in a way. Like I'm like, oh yeah, I did that. You know, I started out with a problem, and then here's a solution. And I'm thinking, like, the times when I'm the most effective as a speaker, it's usually when I don't do it that way. And yeah, so I'm going to remember, I'm going to keep that in mind. Sometimes, like, my vision is so profoundly optimistic that sometimes I feel like I have to kind of establish, like, I know how bad things are in order not to be accused of being naive. So, but that doesn't work either. I still get accused of being naive.
I feel like each of the speakers are working with really powerful ideas that could be very helpful, and they also involve a lot of thought and consideration. And so I was curious how you would each describe the essence of your work or your vision to a 10-year-old who may or may not go to college.
Mine's easy. My mission, at least. Geez, no, it's not easy. I guess I'll just do the book. It's about how to make money sacred again so that it's the ally and not the enemy of the beautiful things that we want to do in the world.
Yeah. That's a tough question. I guess what I would say is the work that I do is helping people see that the best things happen when people work together, when they care for each other. That's it.
First, I'm going to answer the question, and then I feel compelled to add another story on the end of it. Thank you for your understanding. So the answer is, and I've actually often thought about this, almost directly the way you posed the question. But, unfortunately, because I'm a victim of negative thinking, I actually put it in a negative. And I usually would say something like this. Would we have the nerve to say the following to our, I said 6-year-old, but 10-year-old will suffice. Would you actually have the nerve to say to your child that when you grow up, you're going to have two choices about what to do with your money? The first choice is you're going to give it to people you don't know to invest in things, and you'll have no idea where it's going or what it's doing, but just so you have more when you retire. Because someday you're going to stop working, you're going to need money. That's choice one. And choice two is you can give it to people you know who are doing things that make you happy, right around us. Which choice do you want? I mean, would you have the nerve to say that to your kids? And yet we are, I really believe, at the risk of sounding naive from an economic standpoint, we are in the former. We've just been sold a bill of goods. That it's perfectly okay to give your money to people you don't know to do things with it just so you'll have more when you retire. Everything else is secondary. And then lately the social investment movement came around and said, well, don't you think you should kind of worry about things like labor practices and environmental things? And yes, so we're all trying to kind of stick those things onto that broken, we're like pinning the tail on that donkey. But the donkey is that we're just giving our money to other people to create more money so we have more when we retire. So that's my answer to that part. The story goes like this. And some of you know the person, I don't think you'll mind me telling this story in public. So Greg Steltenpole, who is the founder of Odwalla. How many people here know the story of Odwalla? Probably not that many, because it's a little bit, where some of us have been around a little longer. The story of Odwalla is that at a pivotal moment in its growth, It was basically a hippie company. A hippie in Santa Cruz, California, started making the best smoothies that anyone had ever had. And what was his idea? I think this is worth telling the story, not rushing, since we're at a slow living summit, not rushing through the story. He had the idea of not pasteurizing the fruit. Basically raw, it was his version of, let's say, raw food. But they weren't calling it raw food back in whenever that was. What year was that, Matt? Was that like 1990 maybe? Around then sometime. Around 1990. So it was, and those of you who weren't around then, let's say, you don't realize he created an entire category. I mean, all the shelves that are full of naked juice and this and that, now kombucha, all those things, none of it existed before Odwalla. He created this idea of non-pasteurized, fresh, premium juices. And took off like wildfire, started in Santa Cruz, started spreading towards Colorado, got some venture capital because it started growing really fast and was a hot brand. And then something happened. I'm just curious, anybody know what I'm going to say? How many people know that? Well, I know Matt does, that's not fair. So a few folks do. It's interesting. It's three investment professionals in the crowd know the story. A child died from, a bunch of people got sick, and one child died from drinking Odwalla juice. And here this paragon of fresh, healthy, beautiful food, someone died from it. Make a long story short, they identified that there was E. coli in the apple juice that had come from deer droppings on apples that had picked up off the ground, which was not part of company policy, but they hadn't completely controlled supply chain. The company survived, but not without the ousting of Greg Steltenpole, who was the founder, who was basically, let's say, the scapegoat to the venture capitalists who took the company over, pulled it out the back of the lawsuits, and sold it to Coca-Cola, where it is, I don't know if it is now still one of the fastest growing divisions of Coca-Cola, but it might be. It was when it was originally acquired. But now this beautiful little company is part of Coca-Cola. None of which is exactly why I'm telling you the story, but it is background to the story. The story is, the same meeting of Investor Circle that Carlo Petrini was at, we had a breakout session on slow money. Now this was years before I ever thought there'd actually be an organization called Slow Money. It was just to talk about the ideas. It was before I'd written the book. It's probably 5 or 6 years ago. And we had a panel of people talking about, let's say, radical ways of thinking about money and food. And Greg Steltenpole was on the panel. And he stood up and he said, now this is pretty, at least to my thinking, this is pretty deep shit for someone to say this kind of stuff in public. And he stood up and said, well, I want to share this story with you when I think about slow money and some of these ideas. He said, when Odwalla was bought by Coca-Cola, I ended up with some money. And he said, not as much as people think, because I was ousted and a lot of bad stuff happened, but he said, I did end up with some money. And I suddenly had a bunch of financial people telling me what I should do with the money, and it came down to two choices. Either invest it the way they were telling me to invest it, in which case I wouldn't know what it was doing, but I would know how much I had. He said, or I could invest in a few things that I really understood and believed in, but then I wouldn't know how much money I had. And he said, now I don't know how much money I have. That's the story.
I'm sure that we could keep going another hour here. But to honor the schedule that's been set, I very reluctantly have to draw this to a close. It's coming up on 8:30, and as we say in Brattleboro, the night is young. It's Wednesday evening. There are other things to do. There are other conversations to pursue beyond this one here. So I'm just going to say a few closing remarks, and would like to just begin by saying thank you very much to Charles and John and Woody for sharing your thoughts with us and for kicking off many conversations that will happen throughout the next couple of days. Thank you very much, all of you. And then I wanted to rattle off a number of words that I heard, because I also work in education and projects that are related in various ways to slow money and to questions of our economy and to different kinds of organizations beyond the traditional for-profit corporate form in the context of the MBA program that I direct and other things. And I started making a list of words, adjectives, that I heard as our speakers spoke. And the list gets long very quickly, but they all are different pieces of this larger puzzle that we call SLOW. Free, equitable, inclusive, just, humane, civil, neighborly, connected, right-sized, practical, sensible, durable, feasible, energizing and empowering, collaborative, cooperative, lateral, rooted in the land, ecologically benign, globally responsible, honest, humble, mindful, harmonious, compassionate. The list can go on and on, but you know, they embody many different concepts, but yet all together they somehow make sense. And I think that this movement is broad and deep and defies any single label, and the word slow may not be even accurate from a linguistic standpoint. We've appropriated it, but the list of things that I just read together defy any single label. But we know that whatever this impulse and this movement and this avocation is, it's solid and steady and slow and unstoppable. And it reminds me a little bit of Brattleboro. Just out of curiosity, how many people here in the room are visitors to Brattleboro? So quite a few. And then how many people here are locals? Still quite a few. Those of you who are visiting here, especially for the first time, I invite you to reach out. If anyone looks particularly at home, i.e. they're local, don't hesitate to ask them for directions or any recommendations for things to see and do here. Enjoy your stay here in Brattleboro, make the most of it, and realize that Brattleboro is, there is nothing artificial about Brattleboro. That's about the only way I can think of putting it. It doesn't owe its existence, its economy, its cultural life to some other big single institution that it is able to sort of feed off of. There is no large military base here. There is no state capital. There are a number of smaller educational institutions, one of which, or for one of which I work, but there's no large, 50,000 student state university here. Brattleboro is a small town. 12,000 people live in the town itself, and the surrounding villages take it up to about 20,000. But it's a very diverse economy. It's a market town. It's a banking town. It's the town you go to for doctors and dentists and orthodontist appointments. It's where you go to the hardware store. It's a natural little center in the region that we sit in. And it's not doing fabulously, and it's not doing poorly. It's really chugging along, affected by the larger currents of our global economy, but also very much steered and supported and loved and cared for by the people who live here to be what it is. And so bear all of that in mind, and also bear in mind that Brattleboro's had a pretty rough year. And some of you are aware of that, some of you may not be, and I just thought I would share a couple of remarks about that before I close. One odd coincidence is that exactly 1 year ago today, the Springfield, Massachusetts tornado tore through western Massachusetts. In fact, there were, I think, 4 different tornadoes that struck different towns, about 45, 50 minutes south of here. And I remember before this plenary session, outside, looking to the south and wondering remarking on how dark and green the sky looked. Well, Brattleboro missed that particular event. We missed another one yesterday afternoon, although Keene, New Hampshire, about, 15, 20 miles to the east of here, was hit by all sorts of hail and downpours and some local flooding. But that was only a prelude, when I think a year ago, to what actually came here at the end of August 29th, and that was Tropical Storm Irene. And I just wanted to let you know the immediacy of this. You walk around the town, and unless you know what you're looking for, or you go to certain places, you're not going to see any evidence of what happened. But Brattleboro was really affected by this flooding. And during the peak of the essentially flash flooding that took place on that day, water was running in one end and out the other of the basement of this building. There's a restaurant underneath here that's still closed. But water was coming in the windows from the Whetstone Brook, which is at the moment a small, quiet waterway, coming right through this building and going out the other end into the Connecticut River. And I stood on the other side of the Whetstone Brook and watched, for example, parts of a house get crunched up under the bridge here on Main Street. And you saw porta potties and propane tanks and cars and dumpsters and building material roaring down this water course. It was extraordinary. And so where we are right now is actually right on the edge of some of the most serious and destructive flooding that affected a lot of businesses in this local area. So when you take a stroll around, it will all look normal, and it's a real example of resilience, because to get from where we were then to where we are now, which, do some quick math in my head, was 9 months ago, is that right? Of course, money was required, and government cooperation at all different levels. But more than anything else, there was the moral and practical support of everyone involved, the families, the neighbors, the other businesses that weren't affected, that helped businesses to get back on their feet and helped homeowners to begin the process of rebuilding if their homes were in the floodplain. And the results have been extraordinary. I obviously hope that we don't have to deal with this again anytime soon in Brattleboro, but I know that if something like this came along, we would deal with it in stride. And so with that, I guess, celebration of where we've come in the last 9 months, I want to welcome you all very heartily to Brattleboro and wish you an excellent Slow Living Summit.
Hi. Last year, my mom and I walked across America. Talk about slowing down. But the reason I want to share this is because it's an intention that incorporates what you mentioned and also possibly a ceiling of this until we meet again, which is leaving all burdens of the past behind. I seize the opportunity of this now moment to practice the art of the possible.